What's up, y'all? This is Coach Gift Funday back at it for you and for yours. I'm saying, this is a new format on the video. I ain't gonna lie, some of my equipment got, need to be repaired, got to get upgraded. So, what I'm saying, this is just one upgrade. I'm still trying to figure things out on this. But, the show keeps on moving. You know what I'm saying? The knowledge never stops. Here we go. This is from a journal article, The Arab Muslim President Meeting with Europe by Matthew W. Winter. International Journal of Middle Eastern Studies, Volume 12, Number 1, August 1980. And this is published by Cambridge Press University. You know what I'm saying? So you can't say that it's not peer reviewed or no stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Cambridge put out stuff, whoop-de-whoop. So without further ado, we're going to read this. All right. Matthew Weiner, Arab Muslim Presidents in Medieval Central Europe. Introduction. For nearly 3 centuries, at the famous Battle of Poitiers, known as Tours, which is usually regarded as the high water mark of the Arab Muslim expansions in Western Europe, the Muslims continue to maintain a series of relatively isolated presences in the regions of Western Europe outside the Iberian Peninsula. The Iberian Peninsula is, i.e., Spain. Although these practices tend to be forgotten within the larger picture of the Muslim-Christian relationship during the medieval period, the researchers of some 19th and 20th century scholars will seem to indicate they left behind a considerable larger legacy than previously expected. Perhaps the most interesting of these presences was one that resulted in the Arab Muslim control of the Alpine passes, which connect Italy with the remainder of Western Europe. For a number of decades in the 10th century AD, the present study then is a brief summary of the related events of this period. More importantly, however, it seeks to analyze the motivation for this particular excursion into Western Europe, the method of administration of these non-Muslim areas, and finally, the minor layers of this brief period when an Arab Muslim forces control an essential part of the Western European communication. The events. Sometime around the year 889 AD, a small force, perhaps as a few of 20 of Saracens, just for those that don't know, Saracens is that's the name of the people that had the children. You go back to the Bible when Abraham slept with Sarah the Egyptian. You know what I'm saying? And their offspring was called Saracens or Ishmaelites. So they use this word a lot during this time frame. All right, back to it. Land and establish a base camp or a small settlement at the northern end of a small inlet on the French Mediterranean coast, which is best known today because of a town of the southern end, St. Topaz. Known to medieval economists as Fraxentum, it is today known as Garde Frenet or simply Frenet in the department of Val. Apparently, the location and the general environment was satisfactory since defense installations and further immigration took place during the next few years, perhaps including even women and children. The nearby mountain, Mount de Mores, Mountain of the Moors, provide the cornerstone of defense of a land-based attack, and settlements apparently grew in size and population. Once the settlement has been significantly fortified against possible counterattacks, its Saracen hordes undertook pillaging expeditions, especially against the Kingdom of Burgundy and the Kingdom of Italy, Piedmont. Since these predations were apparently encouraged with little or no resistance, and the amount of booty attained was high, Fraxum attracted further waves of Saracens from Spain as participants. According to contemporary account, major reasons for relative freedom of movement through these areas was the fact that they were widely contested between a large number of different petty princesses, dukes, and other nobilities. The latter, in order to gain an upper hand against the invaders, upper hand was not into making alliances against the invaders in order to strengthen their own individual positions. During the first 3 decades of the 10th century, that is 930 AD, little if any effective counteraction appears to have taken by the local leaders. It was during these periods that the invaders successfully attacked and destroying in whole or in part such diverse towns and cities as Assi, Aquading, in the east, the monasteries of Nova Lis and Omsum, Ebron, Venet, and Valence in the west, with major Paxitons such additional cities as Aix-en-Provence and Marseille in the south. Those are in France, I know that for sure. I know Marseille's in France. Of much greater importance, however, is the fact that by this time, the invaders controlled three major passes between France and Italy: the Little Saint Bernard, Mount Cenis, and Mount Guinevere, and were thereby able to seriously disturb developing commercial and financial flow of pilgrims points north and west using these passes on the way to Rome. It was apparently that the latter was brought at the first serious effort to drive the invaders from Foxatum. In 931, elements of the Greek Byzantine fleet attacked the settlement from the sea. This effort appeared to have been completely without effect. However, since accounts of the same year had the Saracens in control of major western Alpine passes. Indeed, the Saracens' operations appear to have increased in both size and ferocity. Since, for example, it appears likely that there was a force responsible for the death of the Archbishop Robert of Tours on his return from Rome through one of the western passes. In the following decade, in areas which the Saracens advanced and repeatedly increased remarks, their raiding and relative activities now extended north of the Alps. It includes sacking the famous monastery of St. Maurice in Rhine Valley. At the same time, making their appearance in the upper reaches of the Rhine, sacking Berwick of York and Jovetia. Since the Hungarians also began their forays and invasions in the Central and Western Europe during this time period, contemporary accounts of the decade of 10 centuries are somewhat confused and not always dependable. As a result, it is not entirely clear by what route the Saracens advanced to what is today southern Switzerland, and then further north. Three alternatives have been suggested, each of which has some evidence in its favor and some proponents and detractors. The first of these suggests that the invaders proceeded almost methodically up the Rhone and crossed the Frucker Pass. From there, they followed the Rhine. Some places named Tour de Saracen near Neve, as well as alleged Saracen graveyard. So there's a Saracen graveyard in the area of Geneva, Switzerland, are proof of this route. The second is Mount Cenis through the northern Italian plains, and then northward to present-day Switzerland through the Bernardine and the Sepperman passes. One temporary account of the Saracen activities tends to support this path, though the lack of any accounts of Saracen activities in neighborhoods with sizable towns through or near which the invaders would have to pass to cast some of their doubts on this alternative. The third alternative is through the Little St. Bernard or the Valus through the successful valley of the foothill of the Alps, and then northward through whatever pass is available. The Mont Moro, the Luca Magna or the Luca Quan, and others, this route provided the route for the least resistance and is probably supported by the sizable number of places which may be or are of Arabic origin. In any event, by whatever route, it appears by the third decade of the 10th century, the Saracens were well established in both of some of northern Italy in towns in the foothill of the Alps, facility discussed below, and the control of at least major north-south routes through the Alps and the Great Bernard and the Benin and the Satmar, which likely controlled Mount Moro, Lugermann, and perhaps Simplon. Once again, the extent of the Saracen expansion and the nature of the activities brought about an effort to destroy Foxum, apparently widely recognized as the base of operations. Forces under the leadership of King Hugo of Italy attempted a joint attack with the Byzantines on the town. According to contemporary accounts, the Greek control of the sea, coupled with King Hugo's land-based attack through a massive Mount de Moors, was on the verge of success when King Hugo decided to concern himself more closely with his personal interests, that is, the future of the Italian throne. And at the time, the contestant for the Italian throne, Count Benevere Iri, was accumulating support for his pretensions. Specifically, he sought the support of hermit of Swabia, and crossed the Great Bernard on his way north for necessary assistance. At this point, Hugo called off his attack upon Faction and entered an alliance with the Saracens. Under the terms of the alliance, the Saracens received control of all the Alpine passes from West Montevere to the east, the Sepner. Despite having become an establishment according to some chronicles, the Saracens made further attacks upon territories north of the Alps. For example, Truro was attacked more than once, and the great abbey of St. Gallen, located near Lake Constance, was sacked in 954. The same year which Grenoble in the west also fell in the hands of the Saracens. It would appear that this was the high point of Saracen power, although there are accounts as late as 972, specifically the holding for ransom of Saint Maurice of the Abbey of Cologne, of Saracen control of Bernhard, and contemporary accounts agree on a general decline of the Syrian activity. In addition, there are accounts and chronicles of conservation to Christianity among various pagan elements in the mountain regions as late as the beginning of the 11th century. Grenoble was recaptured in the late 960s, and a series of other mountain passes were no longer in Saracen control when significant kings or other political figures traversed them. In the year 975, another joint effort to recapture Maximum was undertaken by Duke William of Arles, Count of Area, the Marquis of Turin, and possibly Count Robold of Provence. This time the effort was successful, and the town of Foxham was taken. Its Muslim inhabitants were dispersed. Some were driven off, some were forcibly converted to Christianity, some were exterminated, some were sold into slavery, and their descendants were still slaves in the area more than 4 centuries later. Wow. Few apparently married and settled locally. Motivations. Precisely why the settlement faction should have been established is difficult to determine. According to many writers, including contemporary chronicles, the Western Mediterranean was the home of a number of large Muslim pirates, whose predations upon ships and ports of the Christian rulers of the area substantially disturbed the local economy and trade. It has been suggested, therefore, that this particular settlement was established by a small force which was driven ashore by a particular violent storm. In brief, on a side note tip on that, white folks always say that when they see black people, in Europe or in Russia and stuff like that, it was a storm that drove them off. That's the best conclusion they can come up with. Not that we navigated stuff, And this is a side note. Back to the stuff. In brief, the founding of the Axum Colony was an accidental occurrence. On the other hand, during the reign of Emir, later the Caliphate of Cordova, there arose a practice of undertaking summer excursions known as Saifa, from the Arabic word of summer, in the territory of Christian rulers of present-day France and Spain. Apparently, their original purpose was to demonstrate the religious merits of the participants, who through their commitment to jihad would extend Dasa Islam. Since participants also gained a large amount of booty, it seemed clear to another motive was soon important to us for many. The prospect of an additional personal wealth. This would explain, for example, the fundamental evidence that some Christians and Jews also participated in the event of Saifa, and wreaked considerable hardship upon the populations affected, since despite whatever Christian-inspired exaggeration of Muslim behavior colors, the accounts is clear that the pillage, burning, and the general destruction of small segments of the harvest was commonplace. There is evidence that at least for some of these excursions were undertaken at the express purpose of obtaining primarily male prisoners, called Salaquiba, who upon their return to Spain entered personal service of the Emir Caliphs, and since they are described as strong, highly reliable armed force and bodyguards, and since they were educated and trained in Muslim academies for this purpose, the whole process bears a remarkable resemblance to the practice of the Ottoman sergeants in recruiting and employing Christian prisoners, the so-called January Corps. In both instances, it might be added, the male prisoners were frequently eunuchs, meaning they didn't have no balls. They chopped their dick off. Their penis off. Excuse me. So that's what they did. So they were just dare to fight. They couldn't even do the do. Medieval Muslims and Christians accounts are both frequently to the practice of obtaining sakliba for certain areas. Although the preferred source appears to have been the Lower Rhine and northwest as far as Mertz and Verdun. It is interesting to note that the Jews in this area frequently acted as middlemen, all right, between the Spanish Muslims and their European source of supply. Further, Jews in the area of Prague, another center of supply, also participate in this form of commerce. So basically, the Jews were the middlemen and the slave trade of this. That's been discussed before in history. You just can read William Shakespeare, The Taming of the Shrew, and books like that. In the origin of the term itself, Shaklila has resulted in dispute among linguistic scholars due to the fact that the Slavs were known to medieval Arab travelers in Western Europe as Shaklila or the Pearl-Silicate Block. It is not known whether this particular Arab term is derived from the Latin root of esclavus, meaning slave, or the Arabic word meaning Slavs. It seems possible to trace it to either origin. Administrative patterns. It is generally agreed that the Muslim Arab armies, which established the empire in the century following the death of Muhammad, had a relatively well-developed set of principles of dealing with administered and occupied in corporate territories and people. Despite these principles, however, it is more than likely that the four elements of the conquering armies were less than wholly cognizant of carrying about the necessities of public administrations. Elaborate law which existed and war was developed for the treatment of administration in new territories was not in fact strictly adhered to. Once occupation became permanent, regularized administration procedures were established, which provided a substantial level of tolerance for the subject population and their religion and social beliefs and practices. It seems superfluous at this point to review, for example, the administration and the cultural accomplishment of the Arab administration of Spain, Sicily, and some other Muslimized territories. Important question regarding what appeared to be when and for what reason did the Arab Muslim armies and their leaders decide what status of any new territory and its population was in administrative terms were then implemented. Despite the generous and positive characterizations of the Cordoba Caliphate, European chronicles of the period provide accounts of Muslim excursions to other areas of Europe after the defeat of Pointers, which is filled with reports of less than exemplary behavior, to whom we attribute widely disparate behavior on the part of the Arab Muslim forces. It is, of course, difficult to be precise at this late date concerning such events and the behavior patterns which are associated with them. There is clearly a good reason to treat contemporary Christian sources concerning Muslim Arabs with some skepticism. It is nevertheless appears possible to reach some general conclusion. It is of some significance that we possess a single contemporary Arab source that we do not possess. It is of some significance that we do not possess a single contemporary Arab account. The reason for that, reason why they ain't got one, because when Lady Lugar talked about it, and that's a good book to get, works about this. When the Christians came through, the white Christians came through, and the Muslims and stuff like that, and the Moors, the first thing they would destroy will be the library. You know what I'm saying? She put that out there, and you can see it. She put it out there. A lot of other writers put it out there. The first thing the white Christian will whack off would be the library. All right, back to it. The events accounted here, it's thought possible that in some future account will come to light. It appears legitimate in turn to conclude that the relevant cities of Cordova Caliphate place no great value on the activities of the faction serum. In fact, though available evidence indicate large numbers of Saracens were involved throughout nearly 100 years of settlement activities, even the geographical and social political knowledge of the area would have been never made it in this foray in the general knowledge of Europe which existed among the later Muslim and Arab geographers. While there is evidence that commercial contacts were developed, and we know from European and Arab sources that at least one diplomatic contact between Christian Europeans, Otto I, and the Khalifa of the Caliphate, Abu al-Rahman III, was taken for the express purpose of requesting that the Caliphate cease his support of the Ottoman settlement. The whole ranges of events and conquests here described were not specifically recorded by any Arab chronicles or historians. We may consider this an indirect evidence of two conclusions. One, the activity of the Foxham colony were indeed largely, if not solely, carried out by irregular forces. That is, a group including pirates and mercenaries, including Christians, Jews, and pagans, among whom no one with a scholarly pretense was present. And two, the Foxham settlement and its activities was never conceived as any more unlikely than a highly successful Shafrifa. In the contemporary and the later European Euro literature, the only explanation offered of what these forces began to retreat from the Alpine regions and its outrage of an indigenous population of the holding of St. Marlin's for ransom, in view of a rather ineffective attempt made in the last few decades, their presence, this explanation is not quite convincing. Out of close reading of the sequence of expansion and contraction of fencing settlements suggests that another factor may have been important. One did not seem to have the curious occurred to the previous writers. This is the role of Caliphate and Cordova in countenancing and at least tactically supporting Jasharifim. It appears the death of Caliphate Abu Rahman in 961, and the ascension of his son Akim II marks a crucial turning point. From all accounts, in temporary and modern, Hakam was considerably more peaceful and tolerant than his father. Domestic and foreign policy, as well as personal behavior, which accounts attributed to him, makes it possible to argue that he refused to support the continued use of Sahifa to harass Christian Central Europe. And it is at least possible that he withheld permission for reinforcements to leave for Foxham for Spanish ports, perhaps even influenced in his decision by the early admission of Otto I. Eventually, such lack of support, both material and personnel, would have made it easier for the local populations in the Alpine region to gain the upper hand, since the Muslims presumably suffered personal losses in their continued engagements with the indigenous population, and perhaps in occasional battles with the Hungarians, who were simultaneously sleeping westward. A reliable source reinforcements would have been seen to have been necessary. Even cursory review of events of the mid-10th century shows a precipitous decline in their holdings, and after the mid-960s, especially after contrast with almost unbroken success at the time, but we have evidence that the forces which operate in the Alpine passes have suffered a long series of reversals of defeats at the hand of the local population. If anything, the evidence indicated a process of withdrawal was underway when, for example, the St. Martin's incident took place at the Great St. Bernard. It therefore seemed at least possible that some changes in policy of the Caliphate offer a more logical explanation for the fact that within most of a decade or so, the Saracen presence in the Alpine regions disappeared. Consequences and effect. This brief survey covers a period just under 100 years when one of the most important geographical regions of Europe was infrequently under the control of the indigenous Christian population. Indeed, these Alpine passes, operating northern and western Europe from Italy, retained much of their geopolitical significance even into the late 1970s. It is therefore of some interest of summary and analyze the available evidence concerning this century of the Saracen activities. Archaeological evidence. Systematic archaeological research on the subject of the Saracens in southern France and the Alpine regions appears to have only been undertaken since the end of World War II. Early writers interested in this period cite primarily the various tower and fortification whose origins are contributed to the Saracens. Right? Let's read this again. Early writers interested in the period about the Saracens in the Alpine region periodically cite primarily the various towers and fortification whose origins are contributed to the Saracens, especially by local legend and occasion documentary evidence. The discovery in the 19th century of a number of caches of Muslim coins and a few isolated and sometimes dubious inscriptions. It was not until the researches of Jean Calcin that extensive evidence of the Saracens' presence was unearthed. This includes to date cemeteries, weapons, coins, wells, buildings, and most significant of all, a discovery of muharrabs on the walls of some churches in southern France, notably in Narbonne. It is possible also that some of the present-day churches and cathedrals in the Department of Val in the Rhine Valley may have originally been built as mosques and later converted. Unfortunately, no similar works has been undertaken in Switzerland. Linguistic evidence. It is in the area of linguistic research that perhaps the greatest dispute concerning the presence of the Saracens in the Alpine region exists. The lack of certainty is due to the number of causes. First is considerable doubt concerning the origins of many places and family names which may be found in the Alpine regions. This led to a number of 19th century scholars and writers to speculate on the possible Arabic origin of some of them. No doubt, this was occasionally by an extraordinarily large number of places named in Switzerland, beginning with the syllable AL, the Arabic defining the article. Examples include Al-Migala, Abdullah, Al-Banana, and Albers, to name a few. Second, many locations in northern Italy, especially in Untitled Valley, in southern Switzerland and southern France, contain variations of the word Moor as part of a proper name. For example, Monte Moors in southern France, Mount Moro on the border between Italy and Switzerland. What is striking in most cases is the place so named are therefore where it was either logical militarily for the Saracens to have built redoubts or fortifications in event of passes and locations. The word applied to the roots when it would have been logical for Saracens to use. The linguistic research of this type is highly speculative. It is, of course, impossible to know A. precisely what language or dialect the Muslim invaders employed, more on this below, B. what pronunciation of certain key words might have been, and C. what corruptions of presumably Arabic words might have been employed, or how many metaphors or corruptions, such as corruptions, might have undergone the intervening centuries at the hands of German, French, and Italian speakers. There are in addition some specific problems associated with the speculation. For one, any place name in Switzerland that begin with the letters ALB is immediate suspect, since it is more likely that the current name is simply a contraction of ALP or ALB, depending on the dialect in the different areas, with the local name derived from. Therefore, the writer does not place much, if any, confidence in the Arabic origin of such name and places. Moreover, although a number of other names suggested Arabic origins, see below, are quite equivocating, even plausible citing, we do not know of any systematic methodology for deriving such possible associations or deviations. The study of language development do not, of course, rule out this kind of derivation suggested. It is a point where the writers have to make these suggestions and have not detailed their methods to use to reach stated conclusions, other than they appear to be both logical and appropriate name and place. The following table gives the summary of the names, places and names which have Arabic origins, which have been most frequently cited in the contentions of the presence of the Saracens, and responsible for these terms are still used today. It should be noted that only the first can be documented as a contemporary source. It is beyond doubt that the original name of Pontus is from the Latin descriptive name Bridge of the Saracens, which it may be presumed to have its origin in the fact that the Saracens here erected an important bridge. Furthermore, a family name which is common in the area, Saras, is associated with the coat of arms, which contains a clear description of a bridge. There are in addition numerous places, Chateau Saracen, Pont Saracen, as well as the names of some small villages in western Switzerland, north as the Bonagin, La Serres, which can be assumed to have their origins in the Saracen invasion. Since in most cases there are documented evidence that these appellants did not exist until after the Saracens' presence, it could be argued that for some instance there is a historical relationship. Direct evidence, however, is lacking. It is with the names which alleged have been derived from Arabic and antecedents that the great difficulty lies. One may argue that the logic of the relationship between the certain terms in Arabic and its present location and or characteristics tend to lean credence to the claim. This argument, however, suffers from certain problems. One thing, a systematic check of the Arabic vocabulary for words that might one assume to have been used in these regions: snow, ice, fort, glacier, pass, avalanche, ravine, gorge, barrier, and so forth, produces no acceptable correlation with the current place's name. While this alone is not sufficient to completely rule out those places' names, which are said to have been derived from Arabic, it does highlight the relatively lowhood of finding a specific name having survived a full millennia in use of these areas. Furthermore, in the evidence at least cited above, Mishabing, there is substantial evidence that the name is in fact derived from a local dialect, and in the view of one prominent local historian, this particular mountain group derives its name from a local portion of Mr. Gabel Manure Fort, since the closer resemblance of the times and the use of the local tool. This line of argument is further supported by the fact that many locations in the area did not have any names until the very recent past. Indeed, some local names prominent today may be directly traced to events which have occurred within the last 50 years, or whose origins are known only by the local elderly inhabitants who can recall a specific event. Apparently, the source of the appellation is not part of local folklore. On the other hand, it must be added that the local population of these mountain valleys is extremely sensitive to the allegation that they may have been part of their origins of the Saracen occupation. They have on occasion denied the strongest possible terms of any Arab antecedents. So it may be that this colored, more recent local lore provides an incentive to find an alternative explanation for any evidence to support the contention. So it's some folks there that don't want to be connected to the Saracens. They don't want to be connected to the Saracens, so they deny that, and they just changed the lore over in the past 50 years. Some writers suggest that the Saracens are responsible for certain innovations of economic life of the population under domination, especially in France and Switzerland. In France, these suggestions include the following: the introduction of buckwheat cultivation, especially in the department of Val. Buckwheat is known in French by two names: Blair Noel, black wheat. And in support of this contention, beware Saracen or Saracen wheat. B. The introduction of a cork tree cultivation in the area of Granite Fernet, as local legend suggests. And C. The introduction of the Arab method of turning pine resin into pine tar for the caulking of naval vessels. In support of this, the writers offer the fact that the French word for pine tar is gourdon, which is derived from the Arabic quantain. This evidence is not, however, without its problems. It is utterly dependent upon linguistic relationships in the two instances, and local tradition in the other. In the case of the first, such relationships do not conclusively demonstrate a causal link. In the case of the second, we are already seeing that the local legends are not constantly reliable. Some evidence is more tangible and reliable. It has suggested that the Saracens undertook mining activities, especially in Tenda and Lefrere near Balacanet, where apparently manufactured weapons. In this instance, the remains of forges have been excavated. Furthermore, in the mines near Tendi, as well as the mines of Valeria, there are galleries which bear the name Galerie Saracen, presumably due to their exploitation by the Saracens, and in this case, supported by archaeological remains. In Switzerland, the evidence is less conclusive. In fact, all of what has been abducted to date is dependent upon local legend, and although some extraordinary characteristics of the suspect regions appear worthy of mention, for example, grape, which is grown there, was introduced by the Saracens when they settled in the valley. The fact that wine made from these grapes is known as Henna wine, that is pagan wine, presumably in commemoration of the introduction by non-Christians, has been cited by some as evidence. Others have suggested, as discussed below, that the Saracens were responsible for the introduction of sheep as a meat source, and the refusal of the local population to raise swine as one of the extraordinary circumstances, which cannot be easily explained except through the recourse to the Saracen people. Period. In sum, then, the evidence for extensive Saracen economic activity is not great. On one hand, the indicators that we do suggest that have the Saracen colony had a great impact on one might suggest on the cursory reading of the contemporary accounts. Perhaps the action of the Saracens was certainly more diversified to the extent that we suspected at the time. This, of course, raised the question as whether the Saracens planned a long-term presence in these regions, only to have such plans negated, perhaps by the directive of the Caliphate Hakam in Cordoba, as suggested above. The anecdotal evidence. I'm gonna read this. This is gonna be the last one I'm gonna read. In many ways, this is the most fruitful source of evidence. This is at the same time the area of the greatest interest as meaning of the last events and through the signposts of the presence. In the case of France, the writers have suggested a number of curious usages and customs found in province and in the Rhine Valley, date to a time there's an invasion and occupation, including among such customs certain folk dances, as well as Pacific celebrations that mark the departure of the Saracens from certain small villages. Other authors have tended to treat such suggestion with skepticism, arguing that the contribution of the Saracens may have been made later in time and curiously attributed to an era about which the rural population knew very little. On the other hand, scholars of relative period, late antiquity and early Middle Ages, have long agreed that the Arab Muslim excursion and the presence in southern France had a long-term impact. The question is, how much? A related question for the present subject is it possible, not mentioned necessary, to separate out the distinct impacts of the invasions of the occupation of the mid-8th century of those to the mid-10th century? To answer the first question, for some impact was a monumental nature, utterly altering the future of Europe. In some scholars' view, these conquests destroyed the cultural and commercial unity of the Mediterranean, and these conquests altered established religious and geopolitical relationships in order that the population could more effectively cope with the military aspect of the Muslim Arab threat. And yet others see economic, political, and especially social relationships in subtle but meaningful ways. It is not possible, of course, within the scope of this essay, to adequately summarize the lengthy and complex arguments and the evidence associated with the various theories concerning the impact of the Saracens upon southern Europe. It should, however, be noted that one of the most widely suggested pamphlets has been upon the language and the literary styles and traditions of Providence. In addition, analysis and discussion of such diverse cause and effect as a role of technological improvements in trading relationships, in land acquisition and redistribution policies, and even the very origin of the term fief continues to keep alive the dispute over the aftermath of the Saracen presence. At this time, it seems highly unlikely that any clear distinction need to be made between the events. An event is the time period alluded to above. In other words, barring substantial new finds, archaeological and literature, it is not likely we will be able to do so. In the case of Switzerland, the evidence is more substantial and more varied. For example, many writers have remarked on the unusual characteristics of the population of the Saas Valley, a relatively isolated valley which runs southward from the Rhone at a town called Bissop and ends up in really now a little used past Montemoro, which leads to the similarities of the isolated Anselm Valley in Italy at the town of Macacanaga. One writer has remarked on the almost Semitic physical type found in nearby valleys, while others have observed the population as a whole reminds him of a physical type found in southern Italy or among the northern Africans. It should be added that this difference of aggregate physical type, which has been so often been mentioned in the past, is still visible today. Moreover, at least one observer has noted a remarkable high percentage of names of these southern valleys, of the southern Rhone Valley, which have Middle Eastern or North African flavor to them. Of some of the importance, perhaps, is the behavioral patterns which were first noted in the 1940s but are still evident today. The refusal of the indigenous population of South Valley to keep or raise swine, despite the fact that pork is almost a traditional meat source for the population of the Rhone valleys. 2. The particular method of sheep slaughtering for food, which is practiced in the Bissop Valley, and which is the author of one report states he has previously observed among the North African barbers. And 3. The notable lack of timber and forest stands in the South Valley, combined with the archaeological evidence that methods appear particular to the North African coastal areas for a purpose of clearing forested land, have been discovered. Indeed, a number of writers on the subject of the Saracen invasion have suggested that a substantial amount of settlement and intermarriage with the local population took place both in France and Switzerland prior to the dissolvement of Faxum Base itself. Aside from the indirect evidence referred to above, this contention is very difficult to prove and will require substantial investment in additional research. It may be, however, that a certain amount of intermarriage and settlement contribute to the ability of Faxum not only to maintain and perpetuate its homogeneity in some areas without new immigrants from Spain. Since there have been no systematic research, palynogenetic, genetic, or hematotic in these valleys, which might help answer the question of the origins of the current inhabitants, one is forced for the present to remain with speculation to explain what unusual behavior patterns do, in fact, exist. Since the contemporary European accounts political characteristics, since the contemporary European accounts excursions are overwhelmingly concerned with the present evidence of inhumane, cruel, and destructive nature of these invaders, it is difficult to assess accurately the impact of these excursions on the Alpine regions, much less their long-term significance. Although by some accounts by Arab historians and chronicles, which cover the period in Muslim history, none specifically refers to the development of the Oxford colony or the administrative control which the Saxons had over the Alpine region. This single piece of evidence, which indicates an Arab presence to the claim for some time. The Arab term for the Alpine region was Jabal Monjaz, presumably derived from the Latin at the time Movus Jovis, the mountain of Jupiter. This was the term specifically reserved for the Saint Bernard Pass, which did not receive its current name until after the activities of Saint Bernard himself. Nevertheless, there is some evidence of contemporary sources which would indicate that Saracens were not always a brutal or inhumane as which they were made to appear, often for local political reasons. For example, one account which appears to be completely genuine by a traveler in northern Italy hill town of Vercelli, who describes the Saracens as living within and among the local population in a manner which led him to assume that they were well established. The Saracens neither carried arms nor were molested by the local population. Indeed, apparently administrating the town and the surrounding countryside with a light hand. Similarly, there are accounts of administrations of the major Transalpine passes during the 10th century, which they indicate were administered peacefully, carefully, and even impartially. That is, with the minimum disruption of trade, pilgrim traffic, and a period of agreement with King Hugo. In fact, there are existing records which indicate the establishment to some accounts that this administration of some, the passes did not seriously interfere with such trade transit. Since peaceful administration of the passes by the Saracens continued after the end of a stipulated alliance period, it was in fact not until some time after any efforts were made to dislodge them from their posts. It may be that it was not until the Saxon colony was informed that we were no longer supported from Spain by the Saracen administrators of the passes reverted to collection of random booty and ransom. The most blatant example of this is described in some detail in nearly all contemporary writers, since it involved a man of some piety and renown at the time, the Mias of the Abbey of Cluny. In the year 972, St. Maurice was returning from a trip from Rome and decided to use the Bernard Pass as his Transalpine descending route. After descending north on the north side of the valley towns along the ascending route, his party was kidnapped and held for ransom by a substantial number of Saracens. The ransom was indeed collected and paid through much of the sale of the abbey holdings, amount of 1,000 pounds of silver. It was specifically stated that this amount was decided upon because it would provide every member of the Saracen force with 1 pound of silver. This particular incident is of some importance for two reasons. One, it provides us with the only evidence concerning the number of Saracens to be found in the Alpine region at the time. The actual figure gains some credibility. The fact that no one appears to have seriously considered military actions against the Saracens. And its numbers were completely large enough to make this an unfeasible alternative to paying the standard ransom. And two, the last major action of the Saracens in the past region. In other words, in some credence to contention that the Saracens were more or less voluntarily withdrawing to their base camp of faction. It may be that this particular force was, in fact, slowly making its way back to Frankfurt when it took the opportunity of make one last collection. In sum, then, it appeared that those instances that where the Saracens had established themselves and had decided that their presence was more or less a permanent one, they adopted a regularized system of administration, which was, at least, no more onerous than the ad hoc system prevailing until later that time. On the on the other hand, until some measure of political and administrative control generally recognized, i.e. the resultant agreement of King Hugo, and after Cordoba decided no longer to support the enterprise, they indeed depended largely on traditional means of an invading army for support, taking what it needed, when it needed, with a little extra for the participants. Alright, conclusions. The above account of actual events are well evidenced, as well as the evidence available concerning the aftermath raise a number of questions. First, the reader will notice that the term Saracen has been used in preference to modern alternatives, except in limited incidents. Essentially, this has been done because it is not all clear with whom we are dealing with. It's not clear with whom we are dealing. None of the contemporary European literature makes use of the word Arab. The term is categorized as invaders are restricted to Saracens, or in few instances, Ishmaelites or Moors. What is curious about this, in all the contemporary accounts, clearly recognize and acknowledge the Spanish origin of the invaders, that the bulk, if not all the Saracens, came from Spain and received their instructions from the Emir Caliphate of Cordoba. At the same time, some of the chronicles, Lupin Penhar, referred to them as Africans. Who then were the Saracens? To answer this question probably appears the fact that Saracens invaders were probably primarily of Berber origin and not Arab. Many of the recent scholars have speculated on this possibility, and for some reason should accept this interpretation. In addition to the indication outlined above, it should remember that the Arab emirs, caliphates of Spain, frequently used in the more recently arrived Berbers as their frontline harassment of European and Transpenissine expeditions, and it would likely admittedly established having encouraged the Berbers to undertake Sharif in order to divert them from any resentment and their less than equal status with the Arabs in Spain. In this connection, it might be relevant to add that contemporary writers rather consist in their application of military skills and appreciation of military skills of the Saracens in the mountains, a group of clear preference for mountains. Anywho, what this shows about the Moors, and that it wasn't really just in Spain, that it was in France and Switzerland, you know what I'm saying? And they was running around doing their thing. And it shows, like I said, they got a supposed graveyard in Geneva, Switzerland. Moors, they found a whole lot of the Saracens or the Moors mining expeditions in southern France, all around the area, northern Italy. They found all that stuff around there. So it's a lot of stuff that really backed this stuff on up. Mount Moor, that's in France. So there's a lot of stuff that really back up a strong black presence in Europe that's not really being discussed, that's trying to be hidden. Also, how the population around there eats sheep instead of pig. That's very big too, because Europe is a swine-infested place. They love. I've been there myself. I've seen it myself. They eat them some pig. You know what I'm saying? All parts of that mud. And for a part of it that don't eat pig there, tells you that that was a real big that didn't come. That's a real big influence. You know what I'm saying? That's not really been discussed. Also notice too how they talk about the shipbuilding skills, how they use pine tar. You know what I'm saying? How they converted it. You know what I'm saying, to make it so they can seal the ships off. Because they don't really want to discuss about that. How he's floating boats and things of that nature. Up and down the Rhone, up and down the Rhine. You feel me? So this is a good thing. You know what I'm saying? Very good informative article. If you need more, if somebody try to challenge you and they want more and stuff like that, the Moors sacked Rome around this time too. You know what I'm saying? We're going to do a video on that. You know, I did not know the Moors sacked Rome around 947 around that time. You know what I'm saying? Matter of fact, the president of the United States, Trump, he visited the wall when he, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah. He visited the wall that was built up by the next pope to stop them from sacking and coming back again. You know what I'm saying? That's not really discussed. But anywho, and how they had Sicily, we won't get into that too, because they had Sicily too. The Moors had many spots in Europe that's not really being discussed. You know, and they didn't want, they try to he and ha about, you know what I'm saying? But we're going to open that part of Black history on up. Anywho, this is Iskosi of Fun Day. I know this video was long, but it was worth it. Much love to you and yours. Subscribe to the channel because we dropping African history like this all the time. Anywho, peace.